Good evening, everyone. I'm James Hankin, Director of the Museum of Comparative Zoology and a professor in the Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this year's Prather Lecture in Biology, actually the first of 3 this week, and a distinct honor and privilege to introduce this year's Prather lecturer, Edward O. Wilson. Before I do so, however, I need to review a few logistic matters. First off, this is my cell phone, and I'm turning it off. So I ask that all of you take out your cell phones and turn them off. Second, just a notice, so you know this presentation this evening is being videotaped. This shouldn't cause you to change your conduct in any way, but just so you know. Thirdly, following Ed's lecture, there will be a brief question and answer session. But I want to just say in advance, needless to say, we will not be calling on each person individually, and it will be brief, so I apologize in advance if people want to ask questions, but we run out of time before you can do so. Fourth, there is following the lecture, there will be a free reception and book signing following the lecture. I will explain more about that later. And also, I want to call your attention in your program. It also lists the dates and times of 2 additional lectures that Ed will present tomorrow and Tuesday. Both of them are in the Science Center. Both begin at 4 p.m., and you don't need a ticket for either one. Also, this printed program provides helpful background information regarding both the Prather Lecture Series, which is the most distinguished regular lecture series in the biological sciences at Harvard, and tonight's speaker, and I urge you to consume that information on your own, and I won't repeat it here. Each year's Prather lecturer is chosen from suggestions made by faculty from 2 biology departments, MCB and OEB. And as you might imagine, this process can involve a fair amount of campaigning or even tussling in the successful promotion of any given candidate. Not so this year. Ed Wilson is arguably the leading biologist of our time. Surely he is the world's most renowned environmental biologist. What is most impressive, perhaps, is the fact that his impacts have been great within both professional, scientific, and public arenas. Few biologists can boast of having founded new disciplines, yet Wilson did so with sociobiology, and he is perhaps the most renowned proponent of the modern science of biodiversity, a term that he, in fact, invented. Yet Ed has also been a tireless promoter, a global champion of efforts to meaningfully address the growing biodiversity crisis. His latest effort, Anthill, a novel, which I have a copy here with me, while ostensibly a work of fiction, is clearly intended to reach additional new audiences of interested lay people and convince them of the need for all of us to act, and act now, to preserve the legacy of 3.5 billion years of biological evolution. On a more immediate level, I'd also like to draw attention to the outstanding service that Ed has given to Harvard, and especially the Museum of Comparative Zoology. Through his research on ants and ant biology, his consistent support for our research collections, and his central role in training a large number of students, many of whom have themselves gone on to establish outstanding professional careers, the MCZ's Entomology department is ranked as among the finest in the world. Speaking of ants, after listening to Ed speak many times over the years, I firmly believe that he is on a first-name basis with every ant that he's ever collected. As far as I can tell, he can recall every ant that he's ever seen, and he will tell you an interesting story about it if you give him the slightest chance to do so. Ed is, as Margaret Atwood suggests in her review of Anthill in this week's The New York Review of Books, the Homer of the ants. He is among a small number of contemporary true naturalists who, by their professional and personal conduct, inspire the rest of us to achieve our best and to do all we can to conserve the Earth's biodiversity. Please join me in welcoming Edward O. Wilson.
Thank you very much. I trust that the audio is on. And Professor Hankin, Jim, other members of the Harvard community, and guests, I'm very pleased and proud to give the Prather lectures, and I thank you all for coming. The 21st century, I believe, is going to be known as the century of the environment, and I think that the science, in science, it will be known as the century of biology. Pese, you had your century? This is the time we will either settle down as a species or completely wreck the planet. This is the time we will evolve a better world order than we have now, which I like to call our Star Wars civilization after the Star Wars film series, by which I mean we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, and that is a dangerous combination. The world is beginning finally to turn green, at least pastel green, but I'd like to call your attention to an imbalance in the way that we are turning green. The emphasis today, you may have noticed, is on the physical environment. That is on climate change, pollution, decline of fresh water and arable land, and the depletion of irreplaceable natural resources in general. Well and good that we should focus on these matters, but there has been a proportionately much less attention paid to the living environment. I threw Charles up there. Well, let's bring him back a moment, for heaven's sake. In order to recognize that we have just passed the centennials of his birth and then the publication of The Origin of Species. And I'm pleased to note in passing that one of the things that Jim Watson and I have come to agree on, and why we're now such good friends, is that we think he is the greatest person who ever lived, literally and truthfully. Now, moving on. Proportionately much less attention on the living environment, and especially the diversity of life. Biodiversity, defined as the totality of ecosystems, such as illustrated here at the top in this Australian example, the species that compose them is illustrated in the middle and the lower parts, and finally, not shown in this diagram, the genes that prescribe the traits of the species that compose each of these ecosystems in turn. That great resource has taken billions of years to evolve. Our lives depend on it because we are first and above all things a biological species living in a biological world. This leads me to what I modestly call Wilson's Law. Wilson's Law says that if you save the living environment, you will also automatically save the physical environment. Because if you don't have the physical environment intact and saved, you cannot save the living environment. But if you save only the physical environment, you will ultimately lose them both. Our relation to the rest of the world can be put in a nutshell as follows. Scientists, particularly in the last several decades through the efforts of curators, the director of the Museum of Comparative Zoology and other groups found elsewhere in the world, have found that the biosphere, that razor-thin membrane of organism plastered onto the surface of the earth, to be richer in diversity than we dreamed ever before. Biodiversity, however, which took 3.5 billion years to evolve, is being eroded at an accelerating rate. And the loss of that, which is irreversible, is going to impose a heavy price in wealth, in security, and not least spirit. The immediate future is usefully conceived as a bottleneck of still rapid population growth and high per capita assumption. Science and technology combined with a lack of understanding and the Paleolithic obstinacy that led to our ruinous environmental practices now has to pull us back out. The radical reduction of the world's biodiversity is the folly our descendants will likely never forgive us. Let me now review some of the basic and rather amazing facts about biological diversity. How much, first of all, is there of it? This I put together over 20 years ago, and now instead of the 1.5 million estimated species described, given a scientific name, therefore known at least to a cursory degree by biologists, we now think the figure is roughly 1.9 million, but the proportionality of distribution of numbers of species among the species has not changed a great deal. And what have I done? I punched the wrong thing. Here we are. Now I'm punching the right thing. Yes. It is illustrated here, this is the one you're likely to remember, is the speciescape. And I've chosen an organism, a representative organism belonging to a major group, in this case, to represent in its proportionality the numbers of species known in relation to the rest of the groups depicted. So we have a gigantic beetle looming like a Goodyear blimp over a tiny elephant, which you can see there, which represents maybe 5,000 mammals known, beneath a huge array of mushrooms illustrating the fungi, and so on. Now, let me tell you how little we know of this planet on which we live. Fungi, including rust, mold, lichen symbionts, microscopic fungi, many with unknown functions in the biosphere. Estimated number of species known to science, 60,000. Number of species estimated by experts who actually exist, 1.5 million species. To students here gathered, who are thinking about a career in biology and would like to move in this direction and enjoy a life in the field and exploration of life in the original and the future sense, I recommend mycology. Think of becoming a mycologist. If you went into that field, you would be dealing with organisms absolutely fundamental to the maintenance of the ecosystems and having species, the vast majority of which are not known to science, even to having diagnosis and a name. And of those known, 60,000, only a minute fraction have ever been studied seriously, their life cycles and their biological traits. Consider roundworms. Here are several diverse forms. They're most familiar to people as the almost invisible wriggly little white worms you'll see everywhere in soil, but they occur everywhere else too, on the land and in the sea. Nematodes, or roundworms, are the most abundant animals on Earth. It's been estimated that 4 out of every 5 animals on Earth, and we have to include these tiny little creatures as animals, 4 out of every 5 are nematodes. And if it's been supposed, if you remove all of the solid matter, I suppose ourselves included, that's an interesting point. If try it out on the back of an envelope. If you log stacked all of the people in the world, 6.6 billion now, I think, approximately, log stack them, then they would fill a space 1 cubic mile, less than 1 cubic mile. You could lower all of humanity into a corner of the Grand Canyon. Think of it. That relatively insignificant amount of Earth's protoplasm is destroying the rest. But I'm getting off the track here. I wanted to say that if you took away all the solid matter on the surface of the Earth, it's been suggested that you could still see a great deal of it in the ghostly except for nematodes. You could still see a great deal of it in the ghostly outline left by nematodes. Or, coming to the black hole of biodiversity, the bacteria. I don't know the exact number at this point of species, if we can define species at all in bacteria, that have been diagnosed, known to science again, as it were, but it's probably on the order of 10,000. If you take a pinch of soil, just ordinary garden soil, between thumb and the first two fingers, 1 gram contains approximately 1 billion bacteria, most of them inactive, many of them, most of them dormant, waiting for the right chemical and physical chemical conditions and nutrients to start multiplying. But you take that as 1 billion there, you will have between 5,000 and 6,000 species of bacteria there, virtually all unknown to science. It's been estimated that in 1 ton of such soil, there are 4 million species. And the question, and we know nothing of them. So the question, we know that every one of those species that have been examined has a genome that uniquely qualifies that species and even strain to particular systems of the physical environment, particularly nutrient availability and other aspects of the physical and living environment. It is exquisitely adapted to that little micro niche, and yet we know almost nothing about them. We should be asking, what are they all doing there? And the same with the fungi and the nematodes. What are they doing? How much do we depend in our own daily lives on what they are doing and the amount of biodiversity that billions of years have been spent building up? And if somehow all those creatures do not impress you, viruses, thought to contain, also even less known, and most viruses almost certainly are not pathogens of the kind that cause human disease. They probably have symbiotic, mutualistic relationships with bacteria, and we don't know what most of them are doing out there. But it's thought that the number of viral genes outnumbers the number of genes in all other groups of organisms. That is what I have read. I'm not sure of it, but certainly there is something there awaiting exploration as biodiversity, and not just a small number of model species chose for in-depth investigation, because for every such species, fungus, bacteria, nematode, and on and on and on for these various phyla, for each species chosen and studied in depth by the model system, there are millions out there undiscovered, or at least so little known that they could tell us far, far more than we know. The genome. This is the complete genetic map of a virus. Incidentally, just for your delectation, to get, most people don't have a very good idea of the size differences between these major groups. And here it is, very crudely. If a human cell is the size of Cambridge, then a bacterium is the size of Harvard Stadium, and a virus is the size of a football. This is the number. This is the complete code of a virus. Here is 1 part in 4,500 photographically of the DNA from a single human cell. You have to have, you can see up front, you can see the numerous little threads, and you have to have 4,500 of those. If you were to take out the 4 strands of a human diploid cell and put them end on end, you would have something about the length of a meter in real space, real length, but you wouldn't be able to see it because it's the helix is 2 nanometers across, 2 billionths of a meter. And if you were to enlarge that molecule, if you could magically enlarge that meter-long molecule until you could see it, say it's the width of a piece of wrapping string, then how long would it go? You know, if you enlarged it that much. Would it go out of this building? Oh, yes. Would it go outside Harvard? Yes, indeed. And would it go beyond Cambridge? Yes, it would go approximately 1,820 miles. That's the distance between New York and Dallas. And as you walked along it, you would be reading off approximately, you know, roughly 100 genetic letters every inch. Where is biodiversity located? Everywhere there is liquid water or the potential of liquid water, pole to pole, from the summit of Mount Everest to the Challenger depth, the deepest of all at 36,000 feet below the ocean surface, there are bacteria, they've been recovered, and there are microscopic fungi. Some bacteria live and thrive in water above the boiling point and thermal vents in the seafloor, and so that if you cool them down to sea level boiling water, they just sort of fade away. They don't want to reproduce. You've got to raise the temperature. And then there are bacteria that occur in mine outflows, which is pH that of carbolic acid. And then there are the slimes. Slimes, that is acronym for subterranean lithoautotrophic microbial ecosystems. And these are the mostly bacteria and microscopic fungi, as far as we can see, that start a little below the Earth's surface and go down as much as 2 kilometers below the Earth's surface. And they are autotrophs. They are autotrophs. That is to say, they get their energy from inorganic materials. They do not depend upon the surface for nutrients or for sun energy. They are independent of us, and we don't know much about them at all, except that if we burned the planet off, took the surface of the planet and burned it off to a crisp, they would probably carry on. And then eventually, maybe after 1 billion years or so, they would reemerge and, as organisms that then became like modern life a little bit and eventually produced something like us, and then the cycle would start all over again. The reason why they have special interest, aside from this is a large part of the Earth's, you know, living matter, is that they offer encouragement to those who wish to find or search ever more for life on other planets, because perhaps they are organisms like them are in the aqueous layers, the aqueous zones of water on Mars. As they retreated down there after the aqueous phase evaporated, and after the aqueous shell evaporated, there may be such organisms on Europa, beneath the ice shell, in the vast ocean there, and there may, because that's, you know, temperatures that allow, you know, liquid water. They may be on Enceladus, as those hot springs spewing out water and volcanic material, the little moon from the little moon of Saturn. I think we have an exciting time for exploring the universe, or the solar system, for life on the solar system. We simply have been looking for the wrong things in the wrong places. Now, quickly, let me give you just a bit of good news about our weakness in addressing the living world and saving it, and I mean studying it, never mind even saving it, enough to generate a little hope and determination to press forward. In the last 4 years, the consortium of key organizations, including the Smithsonian Institution, but also certainly Harvard University, the Field Museum of Chicago, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility in Copenhagen, the Marine Biological Laboratories, Marine, thank you, whatever you did, I don't know what you did there, thank you. I probably punched it and we went, okay, I'll come to that in a moment. They have carried forth an initiative called the Encyclopedia of Life. Many of you will now know what it is. It's in full operation. It's an electronic encyclopedia that will have an indefinitely expandable page for each and every species of animal, plant, and microorganism. And therein we will record everything known as it is found, adding new information. It's an open source, has a single access in the web on command. Its address is eol.org. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. Each species will in time be illustrated with multiple views of parts of the genome of the type specimen or other authenticated specimen. And the diagnosis, and onto that page will go everything known about the species with new information as it is inquired. The Encyclopedia of Life would be then carried forward in steps, first from recording what we know and then adding everything new, including new species as we find them. And I think that we will see this will be the kind of foundation that is not just useful, but absolutely necessary. I'm proud that the MCZ, has, for example, the Museum of Comparative Zoology, has played a leading role through Jim Hankin, especially in carrying this forward and making it become a reality. A great deal of interest is being shown by the medical and informatics industries, and substantial more support is expected as the encyclopedia takes on a life of its own in growing ever more useful in services it provides relative to what it's going to cost. Its goal is to incorporate all of the 1.9 million species without, however, ignoring the exploration of the rest of the world in order to uncover the rest of biodiversity, at least a large part of it. Simultaneously, also, in part Harvard initiative, is the Biodiversity Heritage Foundation, formed and launched by libraries with deep stores of literature on diversity and biology and related subjects. Its goal is to scan all the literature on biodiversity and related subjects, which is a lot of subjects, back through time for a total of some 500 million pages. The effort has now passed very substantially, I think, 10 million pages. And all of this, of course, Encyclopedia of Life and the Biodiversity Heritage Foundation is made possible by the immense advances in the last several years. In the current issue, or the next one to appear, several co-authors and I have now called for an effort in biodiversity conservation, utilizing this information that is made available and applying it to biodiversity conservation, ecosystems conservation, in an effort equivalent to that of the IPCC. It should be the sister initiative of the IPCC, but we haven't yet gotten around to that. The implications of or even to think about it seriously and hard, the implications for biology and the environment of these initiatives are enormous. It means that research on Earth's ecosystems and species will be accelerated, that information on any known ecosystem or species can be called up immediately from any place in the world by anyone as soon as it's registered. We can track endangered species, we can plot patterns, we can call public attention to the plight of threatened biodiversity, each and every part. We can advance and then advise medical and biotechnology in directions as yet undreamed. But now let me return to the state of biodiversity. Most of the species of known organisms of the world occur in tropical forest, rainforest in particular, shown here in black, covering probably less now than 6% of the Earth's land surface, down from half of what it was before humanity came along. And what's exciting, I think, for the younger generation's point of view, is that it is the research on biodiversity, especially in places like the tropical forest, where so many species and new kinds of biology await discovery, is that it's also a physical adventure. And especially, including particularly the canopy of the forest, which has never been seriously explored because it's so difficult to get up there. In this tree in Borneo, for example, we see that you have to go, this is typical, up a long way on the bole of the tree till you get to the sometimes rather almost horizontally branching upper part, base of the canopy. And now you see and when you get up there, you see the upper left-hand corner that there's a dense epiphytic forest there, bromeliads, nereids, orchids, spiny cacti, even it's a fairly dry environment, and aroids of the kind that you keep in your living room because they dry out and they don't die. It's swarming, these epiphytes are swarming with stinging ants and wasps. Tarzan would not have lasted 15 minutes up there, but these young scientists are getting up there, and they're devised ingenious ways. This one was by one of our graduate students here, who fired arrows up with lead lines over the branches and then rope climbed up to get up there. Now that looks dangerous, and it is, but that's what graduate students are for. I have told that joke a number of times, and I will stop the first serious injury or worse that I ever hear about, but so far it's been done very well and very carefully. And in any case, the methods now, here's a lovely scene. This is a young lady going out on a giant branch up there in a world. She's the first to explore it. It's just wonderful. I used to think of field biology as macho biology. We would never be bothered by women out there. We'd have our, we would have our machetes, and our compasses, and our 8-mile marches along trails and cutting our way through part of that. We'd all had great stuff until my friend Nalini Nadkarni, one of the world experts on forest canopies, her photograph was taken and published widely, showing her rope climbing up one of these high trees with her baby on the back. And I thought, well, the world is a bit different from the way I had imagined it, and I'm happy to have women take over, at least half anyway, in this very important effort that we have underway. Just in passing, from this one tree in extractions made by the Smithsonian, I identified 42 species of ants. That's approximately the number of ant species, one tree, Peru, rainforest. That's approximately the same number of species found in all the British Isles. Here is I think, going to be the preferred way of getting up there. It's with a crane. And you can see over far right there that the investigator never would just have them hanging there like this in this sketch. Can be, it would be protected, but it can be raised, lowered, swung all the way around, and moved up and down the arm of the crane. And you can cover an enormous volume of rainforest upper levels. Here's the prototype in Panama. Here is a couple of investigators in the gondola in the Panama prototype. I've been in it. It's a thrilling experience. Here they are close up where people have never been before, because they can now study carefully the outer foliage of the trees, too on limbs too thin to climb, and of course too high to reach from the ground otherwise. But we can have adventures like this anywhere, even in Harvard Yard. In fact, I've engaged in explorations with others in Central Park, where the American Museum and others in the Explorers Club set out to show the enormous abundance of living creatures, even in a much trampled city park. It looks two-dimensional to us when we walk over the leaf litter, but we know, and this diagram was in the New York Times on the base of a cup in Central Park, putting a lot of the information in to show you that it's three-dimensional, and that as you come down from the surface, you're going through millimeter by millimeter strata of different physical conditions, temperature, pH, nutrients, spaces among that animals or other creatures can live in, so that you have specialization in all of these small soil organisms that allow thousands of species to live closely together. Soil ecology. And if I can elaborate on what I was saying about career advising, soil ecology, young undergraduate, think about it. And if that doesn't appeal to you, microbial ecology. Now there you can be a pioneer from a senior research project on. It's so open and so many wonderful things to discover. But enough of that. Let me pass on quickly to the fact that even if you don't want to advance, in a career, you have a lifetime of wonderful time as a naturalist. That's me at 12, of course. And I'm at the spot where I found the first colony. At that time, at that age, I found the first colony of fire ants in the United States. Our home in the background there was only several blocks from the Mobile docks where the fire ants came in, and now they are spread all over the United States and out of the United States into other countries and so on. And this is me 50 years later, still down in the dirt. And to tell you the truth, 20 years after that, I'm still doing that. I still make it down. Less frequently. I've been down in the West Indies and in the South, and I'm not going to stop until they pry the microscope from my cold, dead hands. And unfortunately, we let them destroy all of the best places in the world. This is what's happening everywhere, is the destruction of the best places in the world, especially the tropical rainforest, as shown here. And I think you know a lot about that. This is a collage, a combined satellite photograph of the Earth's surface at night, a literal photograph which shows the fires that are occurring all around the world. And the ones to note are the ones in the equatorial regions of the Amazon and the Congo, and all the little speckling of fires, they're actually there by the thousand, represents the, those are fires made by people to burn down dried out, cut down forest and grassland. And NASA estimates that 5% of the Earth's surface are burned every year. And as the area is diminished by all of this destruction, then, as you can see by this classic example, going from large islands in the West Indies to small islands, and counting the numbers of frogs and lizards on them, you have a decrease in the numbers that appears to be at equilibrium or close to it. And that decrease is such that, just to take illustrative figures, if you cut the area by 90% down to 10%, then you will reduce the number of species that can be maintained sustainably on that island, what's left of it, by half. And of course, I'm referring not just to islands in the middle of the sea, but also habitat islands. That are the increasing numbers, the object of studies by biologists, ecologists, including several of my colleagues here at Harvard. And just to show you how grim it is, There are a number of places like around the world, like the Philippine Islands, which have among them a rich store of species, very rich faunas and floras. The Philippines are especially fabulous. In 1900, it still had most of its rainforests as shown here in green. Then it began the process of a removal of rainforest for a whole century. And if you'll pay attention to the date upper right-hand corner, the percent of cover, and then watch the green and those two figures as I run through it. Going, almost gone. Only now is the Philippine government and other international organizations actually starting to take action so it won't go farther. And this is the Atlantic forest, the state of Sao Paulo. From the time when Darwin first arrived, it was like covered by that amount of forest at the top, and that's where it is today. And we are losing so much, including species like this beautiful golden frog of Panama. Its habitat is being destroyed. It is on the edge of extinction. It's also probably affected by the chytrid, the fungus, skin disease. Just another acronym in passing. If you want to remember what destroys species, what humans do to destroy species, it's crudely in the acronym HIPPO, like the animal, HIPPO. Going from left to right, what are the main agents? That is, what are the main human activities that reduce numbers of species by destroying, well, all of the needs of their lives? H in HIPPO is for habitat destruction, and that includes due to climate change. I is invasive species. The first P is pollution. The second P is we throw in overpopulation. I admit that's sort of extraneous, but it's got to put in there somewhere. And O is overharvesting due to extinction, or near extinction by overharvesting, and overfishing. Just to now mention, I've just said something about habitat destruction. Here is a couple of examples of destruction by invasive species. The brown tree snake, introduced on the island of Guam shortly after the Second World War, before people realized what it was doing. It's a specialist on bird nestlings. That's what it eats mostly. It had managed, this one species, to multiply, spread through the island of Guam, and kill every single songbird. I don't mean every species, of course those went, but every one of the individuals. So that's an extreme example. And then, do I have the, no I didn't, I left out the fire ant, but never mind. We are right now at about 1,000 times baseline level in extinction of species caused by our activities. And this easily could rise, and I would be glad to respond if you ask me how I reason it, easily and quickly respond to 10,000 and more. Now to just move away for a moment from statistics and maps, I propose to show you portraits of the deceased and the ones almost extinct, because I think human mind is designed in a way that we care about individuals, so we can care about individual species in a way that we cannot care a lot about talking statistically about an ecosystem. Here is a cerulean paradise flycatcher of Indonesia, thought extinct. Now a tiny population has been found on one island of the Palawans, and we hope it'll be held on to. The orangutan of Borneo, a distinct species from that in Sumatra, has been devastated by the destruction of forest for the planting of oil palm. The ivory-billed woodpecker, gone. I've been involved in those searches, and I even went up the Choctawhatchee River where there was supposed to be some recent sighting, but I'm afraid that's gone. The ivory-bill it's the biggest North American bird, and also gone, apparently about 1960 is the biggest woodpecker in the Western Hemisphere, the imperial woodpecker of Mexico. The golden toad of Costa Rica, newly extinct. It was once practically the poster child of proud Costa Ricans as a beautiful little creature, gone. The banded tree snails of the Pacific Islands, all gone in the wild anyway from French Oceania. And in Hawaii, where this specimen comes from, half the species extinct and the rest endangered. The plants of Hawaii, which we can properly call the extinction capital of America, like the silver sword or hina, found only a few surviving individuals, but so many plants, beautiful flowering plants in Hawaii have been reduced to, in some cases, single individuals that horticulturists are desperately trying to reproduce by cloning techniques. The birds of Hawaii, upwards of 150 species now known existed before the Hawaiians put ashore in around 300 AD, 150, and then they wiped out a lot. We continued, that is the Europeans and others who settled it from the 18th century on, have continued to wipe them out until now. There's only in the vicinity of 25 species of Hawaiian birds left, mostly limited to remote mountains. All of them, except maybe one, is endangered to some extent. We can make quick progress if we do the following. Conservation organizations like World Wildlife Fund and the Conservation International have made good progress and they have to utilize a few of the best known groups like flowering plants and vertebrates, land vertebrates, in mapping what are called hotspots, and there are some shown here. These are major ones. These are the areas where there are within them lots or just one or few habitats that have ecosystems in them that are critically endangered, and within those ecosystems are relatively large numbers of species that will go extinct when that ecosystem is wiped out. We can, I'll just tell you right now, what we could do. Even though they cover only 2.3% of the land surface of the earth, they're exclusive homes of an astonishing 50% or so of all the known species of vascular plants and 42% of mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. By saving the hot spots, and you have to do it with local economic development combined with preservation and even restoration, we could save and then throw in for the last of the tropical forest wilderness areas. That's the Amazon, the Congo, New Guinea, big central areas of that, throw those in. We could save well over half the species, or hold on to them anyway, until we get our heads screwed on right and start approaching global conservation the way, with the vigor we should do. And how much would that cost? Now I'm going to tell you something rather astonishing. This was worked out by Conservation International in a study almost 10 years ago, and so it has to be in percentages. But we could cover most of those with, if we did it the right way, with one payment of 1 part in 1,000 of the annual gross domestic product of all the countries combined, the gross world product. 1 year of that. Take 1 part in 1,000, and that would do it. One payment, if we did it right. Now, that would be at the present time, I don't know the gross world product at the present time overall, but I think it's probably in the vicinity of 50 trillion. Well, if that's the case, then we're talking we're talking 50 billion possibly could save, if we did it right and got going now, a very large percentage of the most endangered parts of the world's biodiversity. Finally, the central problem of the new century for achieving sustainability and conservation is, in my opinion, it's the one that's going to count long-term for science and religion together, is how to raise the poor to an endurable quality of life while preserving as much of the natural world as possible. So what's the connection? Is this just your typical liberal Harvard professor, making a grace note? No. Both the poor and biological diversity are concentrated in the developing world, in the developing countries. The solution of this problem has to flow from the recognition that both depend on the other. The poor, especially the nearly 1 billion that are absolutely destitute, have little chance to improve their lives in a devastated environment. Conversely, the natural environments where most of biodiversity hangs on cannot survive the press of land-hungry people who have nowhere else to go. So I hope that in this brief time I've been privileged to be with you, and this is a formidable and powerful audience, that I've added to the conviction shared by growing numbers of thoughtful people in all walks of life that this is a problem that can be solved. The resources to do it exist. Those who control the resources have many reasons to achieve that goal, not the least their own security. The technology exists. The cost is ridiculously low, and the benefits are beyond calculation. At the end of the day, however, the direction we take, whether we pay attention to the rest of life, and that endangered part of it, is going to be an ethical decision. And although I am not a religious person, quite the contrary, I think it has to be done with a religious intensity. This is why in one of my earlier books I appealed to the evangelical community to join forces with scientists and environmentalists on what is a transcendent issue. Because a civilization able to envision God and an afterlife, and to embark on the colonization of space, a ridiculous idea, by the way, will surely find the way to save the integrity of this magnificent planet and the life it harbors, because it's the right thing to do, and it's an ennobling task for our species. So I'll close with a statement attributed to the late John Sawhill, president of the Nature Conservancy and a friend of mine. He said, "A society is defined not just by what it builds, but by what it refuses to destroy." Thank you for having me here. Thank you. Thank you.
So let me just say a word about the reception, and then we'll do the question.
Yes, thank you very much.
So as I said earlier, we'll have a question and answer session now, but let me first just make an announcement about the reception so you know how this is going to work. The reception for everyone here is invited. It is free. It's at the Harvard Museum of Natural History Galleries. For those of you who've been there, presumably you know, just walk down the block to Oxford Street from where we are. For those of you who don't know where it is, you exit the building on the Oxford Street side, and it's only about a half a block down on the right on Oxford Street. There is a enter through the main Harvard Museum of Natural History entrance and up the stairs. For those who need handicapped access or for whatever reason would rather not take the stairs, there is an elevator which you can access on the far side of the building walking from this direction. There will be a book signing there. The reception is free. The signature is free, but the books are not free. So just so you know. Now I'm the gatekeeper for the question and answer session. I've been designated as gatekeeper. Now I'm told there are two microphones Tom, where are the microphones? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. There are 2 microphones right here. For those of you who are above, you're out of luck unless you want to come down to the microphones. So I'll be alternating. So please, if you'd like to ask Ed a question, please come up to the microphone so that everyone can hear you.
I'm just curious if there's so much biodiversity in life that's based on liquid water. Is there any group that's studying life that is not based on liquid water and what its consequences might be?
I think the dogma is that liquid water is necessary for the maintenance of life as we know it, but I'm sure that there are a lot of very gifted and imaginative molecular biologists who are thinking about that very problem, because if there is any possibility of life processes, or lifelike processes with the qualities that we attribute to define life on this planet, anywhere on the planet or elsewhere, then that's worth immediately pursuing. But I think, I may be wrong, but I think theoretically it doesn't come up with anything quite yet that would make it plausible that you can be free of water, free water.
Yes, Ed. Most of our treasure seems to have flown over to the East Asian tigers, particularly China, and the countries of the Middle East in recent decades. Are you seeing any hopeful sign that those peoples in East Asia and Southwest Asia have any kind of this conservation ethos? Because most of the money that you and others are trying to raise, comes from the U.S., Canada, Europe, Australia, so to speak. Are you seeing any hopeful signs that the Chinese are going to, instead of just plundering the earth or the many other cultures, are they putting anything into conservation? Is there anything that can be done to get some of their increasing wealth put into a good cause?
It varies enormously from country to country for reasons that many of you who study foreign policy and government in Asian countries will well understand. The Chinese are waking up to conservation. They've been almost forced to do so because deforestation has created a lot of their water problems. But also, there's a genuine conservation movement rising in China, and reserves are being set aside, and it's hopeful because they do care. India, of course, has a terrible population density problem. Of course, the Chinese do too, but India is getting over, if it are not already, over 1 billion people in a much smaller part. But India, especially working off of its ancient traditions of sacred groves in which species conservation was a key issue in preserving wild or semi-wild ecosystems, is pretty well along. It also has a British colonial tradition, and it's doing what it can. Malaysia seems to be really beginning to get with it, and in fact is a site of a lot of studies and conferences and the like. And Indonesia is the scary one, because Indonesia, equatorial Indonesia, and controlling half of New Guinea and so on, just doesn't seem to be able to govern its far-flung island states and tribes and so on, so that and although they know what needs to be done, the central government, and there are lots of strong conservationists in the country and so on, and biologists, they have a great difficulty controlling the actual development. And the worst has been, of course, on the big islands of Borneo and Sumatra. They've just allowed, for a quick buck, they just allowed a large part of the great rainforest to be stripped away. So it's mixed. It's not too pretty, but it does have some developments, recent developments, that are grounds for hoping it will increase or improve rapidly.
Ed, I've been having a thought. I've been traveling through the U.S. Recently, and I've been thinking about the way we view our national forests and just nature in general. And it seems to me that we have a problem because we we're either viewing it as a resource, something that we can take from, or we view it as a sort of postcard in which we can go and take a pretty photo at. This is obviously a global thing. Can you touch on your thoughts on this, on our view of nature, how we can get over this, because we're so disconnected from our food and everything else from the earth? I'd love you to touch on that. Thank you.
Well, if you could solve that one, it would be a great contribute to the Republic. Actually, Americans are improving a lot, and they're improving fast. And if truth be told, while there are threatened ecosystems for sure, even in my native part of the country, the South, that's one reason I wrote the book. Anthill was, it's a sort of a wake-up call. While that is the case, in most parts of the country, there have been developed regional or state, regional, even municipal organizations that are very active in conservation. Massachusetts is an example of a state that is outstanding in that regard. So gradually we're coming around, and I think there are fewer and fewer cases of really reckless overriding of environmental concerns, especially where they involve old growth ecosystems and endangered species. America's not doing too badly right now. Certainly we're a lot better off than the developing countries in terms of our species extinction rate. We're even increasing our rate, or at least we are one country where grasslands, native grasslands, are pretty close to being at steady state. And elsewhere, particularly tropical grasslands, are the most rapidly disappearing ecosystems in the world.
We have 2 more questions, please. Yes.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Wilson, for such an inspiring talk tonight. It's given us a lot to think about, and I appreciate it very much. I wanted to ask you, given that much of the habitat degradation, destruction, and loss has been the result of resource depletion worldwide, driven by profits and economic motivation, do you see an economic incentive beyond the moral imperative for changing behavior to save the planet in this regard?
Mm-hmm. Well, to quote one of our more spectacular, recently risen political leaders, you betcha. In fact, I think we, maybe I sound just like a techno nut, but I do believe that it's in America's economic interest. I think we're surely coming to this as almost a national consensus, that a lot of America's economic future is going to depend on our ability to keep leadership in technological innovation. And I think we're coming to a recognition, too, that that environmental stabilization, energy, resource conservation, and all of the things that we tend to paint as color green is highly desirable for the country, not just for our health, but also for our economic growth. And it's going to be tied in with American leadership in science and technology. There are an infinitude of seeming, if you go to the TED conference out in California and listen to some of the innovations that are suggested every year, there's almost an infinitude of brilliant suggestions on new technologies on how to bring this apart, and almost all of them involve, as did the information technology revolution, almost all of them involve reductions in material and energy consumption, in some cases dramatically. So I'm enthusiastic about what the prospects are, and I really want to see the United States do the sensible thing and maintain its economic leadership, but do it the right way.
Okay, last question, sir.
Would you please go over again or say more about the connection between the alleviation of global poverty and the preservation of biodiversity?
Yes. As you well know, the many of the most critically endangered systems in the world, habitats in the world, are in areas where populations are, maybe they are sparse at the present time, but they're also rapidly increasing. And these are people who are still include among what the United Nations classifies as the absolutely poor, meaning 1 billion or more people who don't know where the next meal is coming from. They don't have access to clean water. They are short of food, and they can't listen to lectures as they press into nearby habitats, as the Haitians did over the last century, and they have to press into it to get wood. Their technology is so poor, their resources so few, that they're just going to go ahead and cut everything down, and you can't very well blame them. So I believe that one of Americans' great advances in policy, foreign policy, would be in the area of technology transfer and the development, the help of these countries who, after all, are going to be our future trading partners one way or the other when they start pulling themselves up better, that we start bringing them up as quickly as we can and tie that in with saving their environments for the long haul.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. So once again, let's thank Ed for his lecture.